Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the first Power Hour of 2024 on Clean Energy Future for Public Schools, Benefits and Challenges. I also want to thank people for showing such a strong interest in this Power Hour webinar. We had about 125 people registered, so thank you for your interest in this topic. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Megha Hamal. I am the Chief Strategy and Communications Officer for the Illinois Power Agency. To get started, let's go over some housekeeping items. To reduce any background noise, we have muted participants upon entry. We will be taking questions towards the end, so please feel free to submit questions on the Zoom chat feature at the bottom of the Zoom panel anytime during the presentation. But we will be allocating about 10 minutes towards the end to go over some questions. Today's session is being recorded, and a copy of this session, a recorded copy, and the presentation will be available on the IPA website under About Us Events. Couple of points I would like to emphasize. Today's webinar is for general education purpose only and does not represent a legal interpretation or statement of policy by the IPA or its staff. This 60-minute webinar will explore the expanded public school category within Illinois Shines, its challenges, opportunities, and benefits for public schools. Additionally, the webinar will look at the role education plays in driving the transition to clean energy future. Those who are new to our Power Hour webinars, this is a series of educational and informative presentations on a wide range of energy issues and topics. We started this webinar series back in 2021 when Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, also known as CEJA, was enacted. The webinar has grown quite a bit over the years. We have to date about 29 webinars that we hosted from 2021 to date. And we've really invited energy thought leaders and experts nationally and locally. So we're so glad that you are here today. Those who are new to the Illinois Power Agency or just kind of who we just want to give you a quick introduction of who we are. We are an independent state agency created by the Illinois law in 2007. We are responsible for the development of an annual electricity procurement plan for customers of Illinois electric utilities. We are also responsible for supporting the Illinois Renewable Portfolio Standard, which is public policy designed to increase the use of renewables. And we support the RPS through the creation and development of long-term renewable resources procurement plan. We also conduct competitive procurements for large utility scale projects, and we administer solar incentive programs, Illinois Shines and Illinois Solar for All. Now, let's welcome our esteemed speakers for the session. Our first speaker for the session is Audrey Steinbach. Audrey is the Senior Program Manager of the Illinois Power Agency, where she manages the Illinois Shine Solar Program. As the Senior Program Manager, Audrey serves as the subject matter expert on Illinois Shine's guidelines and requirements, including the expanded public school category. Welcome, Audrey. Our next speaker is Mia Korinki. Mia is the Campaign Mobilization Director of Climate Jobs Illinois, a coalition of labor organizations united around the shared goal of combating climate change while reversing income inequality. In her work, Mia has helped Illinois public schools increase energy efficiency, reduce carbon emissions, and move toward carbon-free energy usage by 2030. Welcome, Mia. Our final speaker is Ryan Zarimba, a veteran educator with over 15 years of experience in high school science classrooms. As an active member of several organizations, including the National Science Teachers Association, Ryan is a leader in the implementation of climate-focused education. With that, I want to give the floor to Audrey, our first speaker, to kick off the presentation by giving an overview of the public school category within Illinois Shines, discussing the challenges, opportunities, and benefits. Audrey, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Megha. Okay, so like Megha said, my name's Audrey, and I'm going to go through some information related to the Illinois Shines program and how public schools can benefit from this statewide solar incentive program. Next slide, please. We can just pause here for a moment to see what is in store for the next few slides. Okay, let's get into the category basics. Next slide, please. The Illinois Shines program has 6 program categories that are all organized by project type. And one of these categories is dedicated to solar projects specifically installed at public schools. So this means that there is a dedicated amount of program capacity that is set aside specifically for public schools projects. One important thing that I want to call out is that the public schools category also prioritizes needy schools. So schools that are classified as Tier 1 or Tier 2 schools, as well as schools that are located in an environmental justice community, are given priority. This is to ensure that schools that can most benefit from this incentive program are prioritized. Next slide. So quickly, I just wanted to clarify the types of schools that are eligible to participate in the public schools category. So those schools are public K through 12 schools and public higher education institutions. Private schools can still participate in the Illinois Shines program, but they cannot access this program category that has capacity specifically set aside for public schools. They must participate through a different program category. Next slide, please. Okay, let's talk about what participation in Illinois Shines can look like for public schools. Next slide. There are 2 types of projects that schools can look to install. So the first is distributed generation. Distributed generation projects, which really just means a solar project that only serves the electricity needs for the school itself. That's the first option. The other option is a community solar project, which is a much larger project that serves many subscribers' electricity needs. Schools are likely going to install distributed generation projects rather than community solar projects, as there are lower upfront costs to installing a distributed generation project rather than a community solar project, which is much larger and needs a lot more space as well. Community solar projects also, in addition to needing tons more space, the project also needs to be managed by either the school or another entity to ensure that subscribers to that project are kept up to date when subscribers either seek to be removed from the project or change their subscription size to the amount of the project that they are subscribed to. Next slide, please. This slide details more information related to the differences between distributed generation and community solar projects. So this slide has a ton of good information related to ongoing project maintenance, the energy use that the project is really aiming to offset, and other items to consider when deciding between a distributed generation or a community solar project. One key component that I do want to stress is that with community solar projects, the ownership of the project by the school is less likely, as the management of the project and the subscribers is usually done by an outside entity. Next slide, please. Another question to consider for a solar project is what type of financing is best for your school's installation. There are 3 financing types that are common for solar installations. First, you can purchase your solar installation. This option has the highest upfront cost, but means that the school would own the project outright. Second, you could lease your solar installation. This is very similar to leasing a car, wherein you pay a monthly fee to your installer rather than paying a large upfront cost, like you see with purchasing the project. Finally, the third option available is a power purchase agreement, or PPA for short. This option is very similar to a lease, but instead of a flat regular rate, you agree to a fixed per kilowatt hour cost for your energy with your project installer. Usually, due to the incentives from the program, this PPA price will be lower than the current price that the customer is paying for electricity, but that is not guaranteed. So it's really important to crunch the numbers carefully on what financing type works best for the school between a PPA, a lease, or an outright purchase of a solar installation. This slide outlines some questions that help guide the decision-making process on the best financing type for each situation, as every school is going to be different and have different needs and different goals with their solar installation. Next slide. Okay, let's discuss the passage of Public Act 103-0580. Next slide, please. This piece of legislation passed at the end of last year and provided 2 slight changes to the public schools category in the Illinois Shines program. First, the law now allows for participation in the category by public higher education institutions, which was not previously permitted. Second, the law now clarifies that projects that utilize the capacity from the public schools category in the program must be located on public school land. These changes went into effect last year, so the program has already incorporated these changes, and there shouldn't really be any implementation work needed in the future. Next slide. Okay, let's talk about barriers and opportunities that come with these types of large facilities projects like solar installations. Next slide. First, I want to discuss how the incentives for the Illinois Shines program are paid out for public schools projects. These incentives are paid out as the renewable energy is produced by the installed solar project. This means that the incentives are not paid out in an upfront lump sum, but are rather paid out slowly over the course of 20 years. Some schools find this payment structure to be a barrier in utilizing the incentive payments to defray the costs, the initial costs of installing a solar project. So that's this first item related to the REC contract terms and payment schedule. Next, decision-making for schools can take a while. Schools are usually only in session for a portion of the year, and there are many levels of decision-making for schools, which makes getting solar projects approved sometimes a slower process than you might see with a private business or some other entity looking to install solar. Finally, upfront capital. Installing solar does cost money, so upfront costs of installing solar can be a barrier, but this barrier can be minimized with one of the different financing types that I spoke about earlier. Next slide. Okay, on to the benefits of installing solar. One primary benefit of installing solar is realized through a process called net metering. This is a process where the underlying customer that installs the solar project is credited for any excess clean energy production that is not used on site. This means that when a solar project overproduces energy, the school that the project is installed at can see savings on their electricity bill. This is in addition to the incentives provided by the Illinois Shines program. So second, the solar installation can be used as a learning resource for students and community members. Having solar installed at a school can provide the ability to introduce the concept of renewable energy and other science and engineering concepts to students and community members. Finally, the solar project becomes the school's primary electricity source. So the need to go to the grid for electricity is greatly diminished, again, bringing energy costs for the school down. Next slide. So where are we now with the public schools category in Illinois Shines? Here, I have some data related to public schools projects by the numbers. As you can see, since the 2021 passage of the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act that Mega referenced earlier, that actually established the public schools category, we have had only about 30-ish projects submitted to this category. That is a much slower uptake than we are hoping to see. So the agency is working on efforts to get the word out on the Illinois Shines program to schools and how it can benefit schools so that we can increase these numbers. Next slide. So related to that, some outreach activities that are planned for the upcoming program year for Illinois Shines include a presentation to the Illinois State Board of Education so that we can ensure that schools are getting information about Illinois Shines from a trusted source. We will continue to attend various outreach events where key decision makers from schools are represented so that we can continue to spread the word about the program. We also will be performing targeted outreach to needy schools in the Tier 1, Tier 2, and EJC communities. And we will also be working to increase information going out into the world through relevant newsletters. Next slide. So that concludes my presentation. The next slide does just include information for follow-up, both the general program contact information, as well as the direct information for the public schools sector strategist. So if any questions arise from this presentation, this contact information can be used to help get those questions answered. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Audrey. It's great to see the outreach happening from Shines to share resources on public schools with schools in Illinois. Our next speaker is Climate Job Illinois Campaign Mobilization Director, Mia Korinki. Mia will be discussing how Illinois public schools can leverage energy savings. Mia, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Mega. Okay, so this is just kind of a quick introduction slide with my information. We're going to talk a little bit, kind of switch gears and talk about how solar energy can be paired with energy efficiency and thinking about kind of whole district energy audits, which are actually provided for free through your utility company. So this is kind of a way to think more holistically about energy savings and help reduce your energy demand. So that if and when you do install solar, you are able to reap even more benefits. So next slide. So just as kind of a quick introduction, my name's Mia. Like Mega introduced all of us earlier. I work for an organization called Climate Jobs Illinois, and we are a statewide labor coalition. You can see all of our 13 member unions there on the slide. We represent, I believe, over 100,000 working men and women all across the state, including teachers, carpenters, electricians, folks in the trades, janitors, nurses, all across the state who came together in 2020 ahead of negotiations for the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, which we'll talk about in a minute, to help make sure that working folks had a seat at the table. And that as Illinois sort of transitions to this clean energy future, that we're really thinking about equity, we're thinking about workforce development, and thinking about how to invest in our communities. So next slide. So this is just kind of a quick overview of CEJA. I'm sure most folks on the call are familiar with it, but it's just kind of a quick recap. The Climate and Equitable Jobs Act was passed in 2021. Our coalition negotiated on behalf of labor during kind of the policymaking process for CEJA. A couple of the things that came out of this bill, including real investments in clean energy, real benchmarks to make sure that Illinois was sort of leading the country as we think about not only the clean energy future we want to get to, but also making sure that we have sort of transparency and accountability along the way. It also prioritizes environmental justice, thinking really about how we're going to help communities that have been disproportionately impacted by climate change and by pollution. Invest in workforce development, and also includes a couple of key pieces that help to decarbonize public buildings and public schools in particular. So altogether, CEJA puts us on the path to be 100% carbon-free economy by 2050. Next slide, we'll talk a little bit about what this means for public schools. So I joined the coalition in the beginning of 2022 to help launch this Carbon-Free Healthy Schools campaign that comes directly from the legislation. So CEJA includes a couple of pieces, sort of discrete policy levers that schools can use to help think about clean energy, think about reducing their utility bill and their energy usage. And so we worked with labor unions, parents, teachers, and community leaders, and also a number of elected officials to launch this kind of community-based campaign to help increase access and education for schools to take advantage of those programs. So some of the things that we provide to schools, I meet with schools for free, just to talk about the legislation, talk about state and federal programs that are available to them, and then help provide technical assistance while they're thinking about how to take advantage of some of these new programs, including Illinois Shines, which Audrey spoke about, including the new investment tax credit, which is now available to public schools on a direct pay basis, thinking about electric school buses and energy efficiency in general. And a big piece of that program that we're going to talk about today is a program called, this is a long name, the Public Schools Carbon-Free Assessment Program, or PSCFA. Basically what this does is it ensures a free energy audit for every public school district, nearly every public school district in the state. And that was established directly by CEJA. So next slide. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the audits, and I'm also happy to answer questions about the direct pay feature kind of towards the end of the webinar. But just to kind of put this in context, Illinois school districts pay over $300 million combined in energy bills every year. So energy is typically one of the largest overhead costs for a school district, one of the largest line items kind of altogether after personnel. So, after the teachers and the staff in the schools, energy is something that schools are spending a lot of money on, and thinking about how we can help schools save money and then reinvest that in staff, reinvest it in the school and in the classroom. So next slide. Okay. So that's a lot of money, right? But it's also a big number, and I think it's hard to put in context. So we're going to talk a little bit about what that means for the average public school district. So based on information from the U.S. Department of Energy, we know that a school district, average school district in the U.S. could save about 25% on their utility bill, so their annual energy costs, by investing just in energy efficiency. So this doesn't include solar. It's just thinking about heating and cooling and insulation and lighting and all of those things that are typically lower costs than solar, but can also really help magnify the effects of solar if you have a lower energy usage in the building. And then secondly, we're here to talk about solar, which I think is really important to understand. What does the payback look like, right? So on something small, like mechanical insulation, you can see a payback in about a year or less. Solar, like we've talked about, is a bigger investment, but still has about a 10-year return on investment or less. That number is actually going down in response to a lot of these new state and federal programs. So the investment tax credit, increased REC prices for Illinois Shines will actually drive that number down. So it's an exciting time to be thinking about solar and energy efficiency in schools because we're seeing this state and federal investment that just wasn't there before. And then if you bring those two together, right, talking about energy efficiency and solar, it kind of in the same context, we did a study with the Illinois Economic Policy Institute, which is out of the University of Illinois. And we found that the average district in Illinois could save about $6 million long term. So that's over a 25-year period by investing in solar and energy efficiency together. So I think this just kind of helps ground the conversation in what it would look like for a real district. Next slide. Okay, so we're going to take a minute and drill down on the carbon-free assessments because there is a real tie-in for solar here, and it's a great starting point if your district is starting to think about energy issues, but you kind of don't know where to get started. So when we meet with schools, I always recommend that they take advantage of this program. It's provided through your utility company. So if your school district gets energy from ComEd or from Ameren, Illinois, which is nearly every district in the state, you are entitled to a free energy audit. And we'll talk a little bit about how you access that. The utilities have actually made it very easy to get those benefits from CEJA. So this is kind of a quick overview of what's included. You will notice that there is a piece around solar energy potential. So this is basically a solar feasibility study, which is something that before CEJA, schools would have to seek out from a solar developer and kind of compare quotes. Now you're getting kind of an independent, objective analysis from your utility company around how much solar your district could produce, either ground mount or rooftop solar, which is what a lot of schools do. In addition to all of the energy saving opportunities that we talked about, things like space and water heating electrification, transportation electrification, so school buses, and then also looking at insulation and then well building certification, which is actually kind of speaks to the health of the occupants, right? So the students and the staff, what does the building health look like? So it's very comprehensive, but this is a great first step if you're thinking about solar because it's free. It's a relatively quick process, and it does include that solar feasibility study. So next slide. Okay, so this is just kind of a quick overview of what to expect during the process. I believe Mega will send out the slides for this, but I'm also happy to put these links in the chat. There is a registration portal for ComEd and now for Ameren where you sign up online with information from your district. That's a relatively easy process. After that, there's typically an initial consultation where the utility will reach out to you, schedule the audit, gather any kind of initial data that they need about the buildings and how you want to work through the audit process. There's also a stage where you submit documentation, and this looks a little different depending on if you're with ComEd or with Ameren. With Ameren, you actually submit that all during that initial registration. So they kind of open a portal for you to upload documentation through the consultation period, which I think actually helps expedite the process, and it's really helpful. ComEd, I believe, meets with you afterwards to go through like any energy usage or building facilities data, so that's helpful. And then there is an on-site evaluation. So this is when the auditors actually come through the buildings. They have experienced energy auditors walk through every building in the district, whether it's academic, athletic, administrative, any building belonging to the school district. They collect all the data that we talked about, and then you have an opportunity with the final audit report to actually sit down with your utility and talk about what that means. And something that we recommended to the utilities, and these utilities are really excited about, is also making sure that they're including information on grants, rebates, and technical assistance for school districts. So this isn't just a report that sits on a shelf. It's something that is helpful for the district and they're able to continue using. Next slide. Okay, so I'm getting towards the end here. These are just some next steps. So if you're thinking, this sounds like something I want to take advantage of, what do I do next? I would definitely recommend reaching out to ComEd and Ameren. They both have kind of public school liaisons to help them take advantage of this program. They're really interested in helping schools, especially low-income schools, because they are required by law to help high-need school districts first. And so if your school district falls into that category, they have some additional resources to help you out. Definitely feel free to reach out to myself. Again, we have information to help you think about grants and rebates and technical assistance. We also have a webinar coming up on March 19th that includes a lot of that information that you're welcome to attend. And then there's some other resources here as well around federal infrastructure grants and then the Clean School Bus Program, which is a little outside the scope of this webinar, but it's something that I really love to plug because it's a great opportunity. Next slide. Okay, I know we're going to handle questions at the end, but I'm also happy if you have a question, throw it in the chat and I can kind of work on that to help deal with the kind of stream of questions as we work through the presentation. Next slide. These are just some additional resources. Thank you to Mega and to the rest of the IPA team. I will go ahead and hand it back to Mega, and I really appreciate everyone taking the time to hear more about these programs.
Thank you, Mia. Thank you so much for sharing some great insights on how solar energy can be paired with energy efficiency, which can result in energy savings and other benefits for schools. Thanks. So our last speaker for the session is Ryan Zaremba. Ryan is an educator, and he will be discussing a teacher's perspective of clean energy in schools. Ryan, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mega. Thank you for having me. I'm here as an educator to provide my viewpoints on how these infrastructure programs in public schools and in schools in general can be quite the opportunity for student engagement and learning and skill building. Next slide. So just a little bit about how I became involved in this type of work. I attended a citizen science project through the Earthwatch Institute, and I went up to Churchill, Manitoba, Canada, and just worked under 2 research scientists and collected a lot of data on how climate change was affecting the freshwater melt ponds up in the subarctic. And while I was in that process, I was there for about 10 days. And while I was in that process, I had a lot of reflection time to think about how does this apply to what I do every day in the classroom with my students. And it just raised a whole lot of questions about why are we not directly teaching climate change and sustainability and environmental justice in our classrooms. And so it got me thinking about, well, what could I do as a teacher to kind of break loose from that traditional, I teach science, so science curriculum that we have, and incorporate these very real world learning opportunities and skill building opportunities for our students so that we can equip them for a future that they are going to be inheriting. And so, you can see a list of the questions that I have here this is just an example of a number of them that came up for me. But one of the biggest ones, I think, is the last one. Why aren't we infusing and enhancing our curriculums at all age levels and across all disciplines? So you'll see in a later slide, one of the questions that I have, I'm sorry, it's actually on this one where it says, why is it just a science thing? It's the second question there. And I think a lot of people view climate change education or environmental education as just a science. And I think that is a missed opportunity. And so I will go into that a little bit further in the next slide. So I think, as I mentioned here, if we're not addressing these and exposing our students to these very real world issues that are present, but also definitely in the future, we're failing our students first and foremost, but we're also missing opportunities. So what does the future hold in terms of how climate change is going to affect the world that our students are inheriting? What does the job market look like? I think that I say to my students all the time that there are jobs that we don't even know are going to exist yet. So we have to kind of have that forward thinking to say what types of skills and what content are the students going to need in order to be prepared for those. So what this would do, what this would require is for us to do a really thorough audit of our curricula and basically comb through it and say what are things that our students could use in the future. And if the answer to that is like, well, we don't have some things here that they could use, then we should be getting rid of that and updating our curricula so that our students are better prepared for the future. You know, through technology and AI and the internet, content is very easily accessible. And so what we really need to focus more on as educators is the skills, the problem-solving skills, the critical thinking skills that are going to be needed in order to be successful in our future that is upon us. You know, content, I'm not saying we shouldn't be teaching content. Absolutely, we should. It's what drives joy in education. But we need to be working more on skills than we do presently. So this is a lot of focus on, especially in the science realm, is providing students learning experiences, learning by doing, allowing them to make mistakes through trial and error and learning from their mistakes. And so this is going to require you know, increased funding and investment in STEM education and vocational and trade education as well. This might be a controversial statement, but I'm going to say it. You know, college might not be for every student out there. And I think, you know, in the past 2 decades or so, that has kind of been the narrative that has been out there, is like every student needs to go to college. I'm not an advocate of that. I think that some students are going to thrive in a trade environment, in a vocational environment, and we need those people in our future, in our economy in the future as well, to help drive our transition to clean energy. And then, of course, everything in the education realm needs to be standard based, and so the NGSS standards, Next Generation Science Standards, should be what's driving our curricular changes in the science and the STEM areas here. Next slide. So this is just an example of a brainstorm of some of the skills that I could envision our students need to have to be equipped to be successful in our future economy in transitioning into clean energy. And so problem solving through all of these different aspects is going to be crucial for our students to be successful. Next slide. And again, another brainstorm here, kind of going back to the idea of, you know, this is just not just a science thing. Of course, we can come up with lots of science-based or STEM-based topics here when we're talking about a transition into clean energy. So what is clean energy? How does it work? Where does it come from? What are we considering? What needs to be considered for a transition? But there are lots of other applications in other disciplines as well. And so this was just a really quick brainstorm that I put together in different disciplinaries. I think the last 2 are really important. Civic engagement. How can we get our students to engage with the community? How can we get our students to engage in these transitions? How can we empower our students and give them more agency in these projects? As well as then these opportunities for cross-graded interdisciplinary work with students. How can we get our little ones working with our middle school kids? How can we get our English classes working with our science classes? Things like that, so that we are able to actually make the connections. The students are able to make the connections across discipline and see a more holistic view on how all of a transition to clean energy in their communities that they are invested is going to benefit the future. Next slide. So this is, it was mentioned on in the last bullet, but there is a organization called the Multi-Solving Institute. And I put this on here with a very specific reason, because I use this in my classroom with my kids, but it's also super powerful in lots of different capacities. So I'll put the web link. I forgot to put it on the slide, but I will put the web link for the Multi-Solving Institute in the chat after I'm done with my presentation. But their whole idea is that any type of climate solution or solution in general, or idea that you want to ponder, you can use this flower model to help drive that and assess it and say, is this going to be something that is going to be effective, viable, and efficient? And so the basic idea of the flower model is that, you know, you have your flower here. The petals are all different areas that a solution could affect possibly, or maybe not affect. And so when you have some type of climate-based project or solution or idea, and you want to kind of assess its efficiency, its effectiveness, you can go ahead and see which of these areas it actually covers. So for instance, if we were to, solar panels on top of a school building, we would then go ahead and have the kids say, okay, if we were to put solar panels on top of our building, would it affect jobs and livelihoods? I think the answer to that would be yes. We'd have people who would be, jobs would be created for, or jobs would be utilized in order to set up and maintain this infrastructure on the roof. So jobs and livelihoods would be covered. Does it increase our climate resilience? Absolutely, it does. If the power goes out and we don't have access to power because of some storm, we have this backup plan. We've got these solar panels on the roof that we can use. Therefore, we're more resilient. Does it help us with our energy and mobility? Absolutely, it does. I think that's a given there. So the idea is to go around the petals and color them in. And it's just a really great way of assessing if a project is going to be efficient and worth investing in. The middle one, connection, is also very important. It's a little bit more on the abstract level, but the connection that the student has to the project, as well as the connection that the student might have with the earth and the environment as well. So I like using this for larger infrastructure type problems, but really I'm using it more for kids in project-based learning, what they're doing. And so they're, if they come up with a project topic, I'm going to ask them to fill out this flower model, and they can then visually see, it's very powerful, how effective and how many of the petals it covers. The more, the better, obviously. So let's go ahead and switch the slide, please. And then, of course, there is an equity piece that comes along with this. The general sense is that, their resources are not equitably distributed or available to different communities. And so that is very true within the public school realm as well. We have in a large part, a property-based tax funding system. And it's clear that we see districts that have larger tax bases having more access to resources. And so we would need to then figure out a way to, and some of these incentive programs that have been talked about so far have been great in addressing this as well, but allowing students and teachers and school districts to have equitable access to resources. One of the big things as a teacher that I see is my access to resources in my current role it's amazing. It's wonderful. Okay, but it wasn't always that way for me when I taught in other school districts, and that was directly tied to equity pieces that were not equitable in these situations. And so we need to try to figure out how to not only work with funding, but also access to these programs and these types of curricula for underrepresented groups as well. So POC, women, etc. Go ahead and next slide. So this slide is all about just the idea of just individual changes versus community-based changes. And so what does that mean? Well, there's a large focus, especially with folks who are just starting to learn about climate change and sustainability and environmental justice, that individual actions are super important. I'm going to start composting. I'm going to go vegan. So these are individual choices, and all of those things are important. But ultimately, what we see is that when an individual can be empowered to lead a community-based change, it is much more effective in the end. It also then allows students to build skill along the way. Community organizing, grassroots approaches. Student agency, fostering sense of belonging in a community. All of these things are super important. So when you're asking students to make changes to live a more sustainable life, wonderful on an individual level, but also empowering those students to work on making those investments in the community as well. Next slide. Oh, that's, I think, the end of my little presentation here. You can see my email is right there. So feel free, if you have any questions, to go ahead and reach on out. And thank you very much to everybody for listening.
Thank you, Ryan. Really, as we strive towards a greener and more sustainable future, it is evident that education plays such an essential role in driving the transition to clean energy while empowering students and underserved communities and fostering innovation. So thank you so much for sharing that, insight with us. As Ryan mentioned, the contact us of our, wonderful speakers are just listed here, and we will be sharing a copy of this presentation on the IPA website. With that, I want to open up the Q&A and see if we have any questions that came through the chat. So let's see. I know some of the questions have been answered already. So I'm just going to go through these questions, and okay, it looks like we've answered all the questions. Correct me if I'm wrong, Tori, here.
Yeah, it looks like that is correct. It looks like actually we do have one question asking if schools faced any upfront costs with a PPA agreement.
Yeah, it looks like Audrey answered that. Audrey, do you want to add anything?
No, I think I can just say what I put in the chat, which is that we don't always have insight into the contractual agreements that the underlying customer, in this case, the school, makes with their project installer. So it really depends on the agreement that you have with the installer and what their costs and fees might look like. One tip that we do say to all underlying customers that have projects participating in the Illinois Shines program is we do encourage folks to get quotes from more than one company and make sure that you are going through those quotes and making sure that you are well aware of any fees or anything else involved.
Sure, thank you. I wonder if this question was answered, Audrey. I apologize if it is. Question from John. Do you have any numbers for how many schools using other categories since CEJA, and if that's something we can share after the presentation? But just wanted to make sure that question was addressed or not.
So that would be a direct data pull that we would need to do. So I think John knows who to reach out to in case he wants that direct data. So John, let us know if you would like us to pull that data. But it's, as I said in the chat, it's not a 100% guarantee. Projects aren't required to tell us if they are located at a public school if they are not participating in the public schools category. So this is kind of an assumption that we make in data review based on, if the project is called such and such school project, then we can make a pretty good assumption that that project is located at a school, but it's, I guess, not a 100% guarantee there.
Sure, thank you. Question from Tad. Can you share a contact list for the schools? Is that something we can do? And I don't know if that question is appropriate for Audrey or Mia, so I apologize, but that was a question that just came at 12:48.
So I can say that we don't have a comprehensive contact list for every school district in the state. We just kind of work with schools that reach out to us. I'm trying to think who would have some. The State Board of Education might have some of that information. If you're using it for like lead generation, that would probably be a more appropriate place to find that information. But no, we don't have a list like that.
Thank you, Mia. And then there was a question on if it was answered, question regarding funding, but let me just go back. On how to handle the appropriation cancellation of funding. Was that question answered? I just want to make sure.
Sorry, I'm just trying to catch up on the chat.
It was at 12:48 p.m. that was asked after the contact list question. Just want to make sure if it was answered or not from Tad Legacy.
I think he said it was answered. I also am confused by the question, so I don't know if anyone that is not confused by the question.
So I can jump in. I think this relates to Don Fisher's question earlier in the presentation around PPAs and a specific piece of legislation related to financing. I know Audrey put in the chat that she's not too familiar with this law. This is also something that's like new to me, but I can certainly look into it. Maybe it's something that we could follow up with folks on. I can definitely take down information for Dawn, and it looks like Tad was also interested. I don't have that information offhand, but it's something that we can kind of look into and maybe get back to folks on if that's acceptable.
Yeah, that'll be great. Thanks, Mia. I think we've answered almost all the questions. I'm just going through the chat. I'm also looking at the time. It's 12:51. So I think I want to thank everyone for joining the webinar today. This was our first webinar of the year, and we have so many other webinars planned for March, April, and May. So stay tuned. We'll be sharing that information through our email announcement, also through LinkedIn, and also through our website. So stay tuned. Thank you all for taking the time to be part of the IPA Power Hour webinar. With that, I would like to conclude this webinar, and I want to thank our wonderful speakers for joining, and a recording of this presentation and the presentation slides will be available on the IPA website. So thank you.